from the New International Version. At the place where Jesus was crucified, there was a garden, and in the garden a new tomb in which no one had ever been laid. Because it was the Jewish day of preparation, and since the tomb was nearby, they laid Jesus there.
Good morning. I'm Bob Schrog, and I'm representing the Eden Peace and Witness Commission. We're very, very pleased to have Karen Candle as our guest speaker today. She currently serves as the Executive Director of the Kansas Institute for Peace and Conflict Resolution, also known as KIPCOR, located at Bethel College. Karen has a bachelor's degree in international relations from Indiana Wesleyan University, a master's degree in conflict transformation from Eastern Mennonite University. She has earned a graduate certificate in faith-based peace building from Eastern Mennonite Seminary. She has studied peace and conflict in Lithuania and spent a semester as a volunteer intern with the Holy Land Trust in Bethlehem, Palestine. Karen's credentials in peace building and conflict transformation come not only through education but also experience. She lived in Bethlehem for about 4 years, where she served as a Holy Land Program Coordinator for Experience Mission and English Communications Officer for Bethlehem Bible College. She has served as a Peace Associate at the Lombard, Illinois Mennonite Peace Center and worked with Chicagoland Trauma-Informed Congregation Network before coming to KIPCOR. Karen, it's my pleasure to welcome you to Eden Church.
Hi, good morning. We'll do a little mic check. I think we're good. Okay. Okay, so my name's Karen Candle. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I've been looking forward to this for a number of months. We worked this out, and it's always fun to kind of find connections. I'm from Indiana, and on my first call, after kind of arranging that this might work, Pastor Kenzie was on Zoom, and he said, hey, I think I know your brother. Is this your brother? And I was like, wow, yes, because my brother went to Heston over a decade ago. And I'm not from this area, but in the few churches I've spoken at, there's always some kind of cool connection. So it's a pleasure to be here with you. My first time out here to Eden Mennonite. So thank you so much for having me. I'm going to be sharing today a passage that I went through frequently during my time in Palestine. So let me give you a little bit of a synopsis of what I was doing in Palestine to kind of paint the picture for you. So you can see here, and you can go to the I can go to the next slide. I think I have the clicker. Perfect. Okay, so this is an overview from the Mount of Olives looking out over to the old city of Jerusalem. So this was a picture I took. In my time in Palestine as the Holy Land Program Coordinator for Experience Mission, the point of what we were doing for the 4.5 years I was there was to bring young adults from the States, mostly from evangelical backgrounds, though not exclusionarily so. They would come, and our whole point was, how do we live and be in the spaces where Jesus taught and lived his teachings? And how do you do that in the current geopolitical realities? So these young folks, ages 21 to 30, would come. They'd live with host families, predominantly Palestinian, Christian, and Muslim, but we would also, on our longer terms, if it was the 3-month trips, they would also live with Jewish Israelis as well. And so we would wrestle with Scripture each week. We would meet together on a Saturday, and we'd be going through Scriptures like what we'll do today, and we'd wrestle with, what does it mean to be a follower of Jesus in the land that he taught these things, where he died teaching these things? And so kind of grappling with the harsh realities. How many of you have heard anything about Palestine in the news lately? Sure, yeah. it's a place where there's a lot of, there is a lot of history there, but there's a very real reality of hard things going on. So that'll kind of hopefully help paint the picture a little bit for what I'm going to be talking about today as we discuss Luke chapter 19. So I'm going to read for us Luke chapter 19, verses 41 to 44. So this is Jesus, and if this is like Palm Sunday, if you can think when Jesus is on the colt, about to come down the Mount of Olives and up into the city, this kind of mimicking the triumphal entry of a king into Jerusalem. This is Jesus on a baby donkey, a colt, entering. And so if you remember, that's in the place of Bethphage or Bethany, which is also where Lazarus was. Currently, the city of Lazarus is on the other side of a 28-foot concrete wall with the Israeli apartheid separation barrier. So things look a little differently than they would have then, but when I would stand there with groups looking out over the old city of Jerusalem with this view, I would always read to them this passage, and then we would kind of start to talk through what that means. So I want to read for us in Luke chapter 19, verse 41. As he approached Jerusalem and saw the city, he wept over it, and he said, "If you, even you, had known on this day what would bring you peace, but now is hidden from your eyes. The days will come on you when your enemies will build an embankment against you and encircle you and hem you in on every side. They will dash you to the ground, you and the children within your walls. They will not leave one stone on another because you did not recognize the time of God's coming to you." It's not a very hopeful message to start off with for Peace Sunday, but you all are a Peace Church, and so we're going to keep diving into this. Why do you think Jesus was crying? I don't know if you guys are like a call and response type of congregation, but I'm more than happy to field your answers. Why would Jesus have been crying at this point and saying what he did? He wept over Jerusalem and saying, if you had only known this day, what would bring you peace, but it's hidden from your eyes. Any ideas? That's all right. We'll keep going. So Jesus is weeping, and then he goes on to say, you know, these walls, not one is going to be left on another, and all these terrible things are going to happen because you didn't recognize the timing of God's coming to you. So, before we answer those questions about why Jesus might have been crying, I want to go back to his earlier teachings, which we find in Matthew 5. So on a Peace Sunday, it makes sense that we end up in Matthew 5, because this is where Jesus talks about loving your enemies. So this sermon that Jesus gave, the Sermon on the Mount, predates this. So he would have already done this teaching before he's approaching Jerusalem for this Passover coming into town. So I want to read to you briefly this part in Matthew 5. And this is Matthew 5, verse 17, where Jesus is saying, after he's gone through the Beatitudes, where he says, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I've not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. Truly, I tell you, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen, will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. Anyone who sets aside one of the least of these commands and teaches others accordingly will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever practices and teaches these commands will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven." So here Jesus is proclaiming to fulfill the law. When people would hear this, and we'll kind of go through a few of these segments here, when they're hearing this, they're like, oh, this harkens back to Old Testament law. I'm familiar with this. This is what we're supposed to be doing. But Jesus is saying, not only am I saying you need to do those things, like not murder, so he continues right on after that about murder. He's saying, I'm not even telling you don't murder. I'm telling you don't be angry. And if you have something against your brother, you need to go fix that before you come to me. So it's a way of elevating the law into a way of how we're supposed to be living life. It's not just the things of don't do this, but it's an active way of being in the world. And so he's restructuring our kind of paradigm of how we think and how we act in the world to try and elevate us to, he's not abolishing the law, he's saying it's actually this, and I'm the embodiment of that, and I am going to fulfill what this is supposed to look like. Keep your eyes on me. Follow me. So then he's also talking about our love for enemies. And this is where I imagine, again, I didn't grow up in a Mennonite church, but I always say I'm kind of Anabaptist adjacent because I grew up initially in a Mennonite church. There was a bad church split, and then I grew up in a non-denominational church with kind of this Anabaptist background. And so as peace churches, I think there's a lot that we do really well in terms of how we address direct violence and structural violence, but sometimes we're not super duper great at the interpersonal stuff. And I saw that from last week in Pastor Derek's message, that sometimes that can be one of the hardest parts, is this, how do we actually engage with one another non-violently and in a way that emulates Jesus? So I'm going to get to that in just a second. This love for enemies part is Jesus saying, you've heard that it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy, but I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Again, it's not just abstaining from doing a thing, it's going into and being a part of the way of Jesus and how you live your life. So why make the jump from Luke 19 and Jesus weeping over Jerusalem as he looks out to what we're talking about here? And I would offer, this is how I would kind of pose it to my groups as well that would come, that I think sometimes things can get really spiritualized, and we can even think about peace in these really like beautiful, ethereal ways that are like nice and good. But peace is really gritty and hard, and the way of being a person of peace can be tough, and it can be lonely and harsh. And so I think Jesus standing over, Jesus standing out, looking over the Mount of Olives and weeping and thinking, I've told you this, I've modeled this, and still you're going to remain stuck in your ways to continue living life in a paradigm of violence and power over, and how do you kind of squish the other people that get in your way? And he's saying, what I've come, when I talk about my kingdom, it's counter to that. It's a total restructuring of what this should look like, which is like embodied in how he even enters the city on a baby donkey, which is like not majestic at all. He's a grown man on a baby donkey. You could even maybe imagine his feet are almost dragging on the ground because it's a small animal. And it's kind of a mockery of this triumphal entry into Jerusalem as a king or a militant warrior, a militant Messiah, which is what everyone expected. And so Jesus, and it chokes me up because being from a place, having come back from this place, seeing the extreme devastation and harshness of life lived in Palestine, Israel, I can feel that sense of like, even today, Jesus have been weeping. Were he standing in the same place today, looking out, that I think he would still weep. And what I would offer, because when I ask groups, what do you think that meant? Like, is Jesus just talking about Jerusalem? And I think maybe so, you could argue, that Jesus was saying that these things are going to happen because you didn't recognize the coming of the Lord's time to you, and you're not going to change your paradigm of how you're going to operate. And so then we know in 70 AD, the temple was destroyed, and then you have the Jewish diaspora. So people were kicked out, spread out, and then you have centuries long of Jews being exiled from the land. And so I think, sure, that could be kind of a foretelling of that immediate thing that was to come in the decades after Jesus. But I also wonder if Jerusalem isn't a microcosm for us to look at, for Jesus to say, if only you had known this day what would bring you peace. And I imagine Jerusalem as a microcosm for the rest of the world. That Jesus is looking out and saying, if only you, the world, would turn to me, if you would live the ways that I have shown you and I have taught you, then you might find peace. But because you won't, it's hidden from your eyes, but it's not because he's hiding it from our eyes. It's because we're failing to recognize what's been given to us is a totally different paradigm, one that cares for our neighbor and elevates the law to be things of action that we do to care for people instead of just not murdering them, right? We go the extra step and we're showing love to our enemies. That's a huge shift. For people hearing this in that day and age would have been massively difficult to hear. Also, Jews living under Roman occupation, massively difficult to hear. For Palestinians now living under Israeli occupation, massively difficult to hear. These are not easy teachings. And so that's why I'm thinking for us here as a Peace Church, how can we take these types of teachings and apply them to our lives in ways that actually hit us at a heart level? So I think Mennonites do a fantastic job of organizing. There's a long history of nonviolent resistance. And so you have kind of your direct violence, where it's someone actually like physically harming another person. We have structural violence, so the way policies and government play themselves out that can disadvantage other people, these violent ways that society is ordered that hurt people. But then we have the more kind of minutia, like not as visible, ways that we just exist as human beings one to another. And I wonder if that's an area that sometimes we don't think about as much as followers of Jesus to actually emulate that well. And so that brings me to a little bit of the work that I do, or at least I've tended to gravitate toward controversy my whole life, or conflict. And again, that was born out of a painful experience from my folks who went through a church split, and growing up they said, we're not going to do this in our family. Like when conflict comes up, we're going to deal with it, and we're going to figure out how to make it through and not kind of brush things under the rug. So growing up was always kind of a checking in. How are we doing? What do we need to be changing? And it was beautiful. Definitely not perfect, but a real gift to myself and my brothers. Which then leads me to like this type of work where I just like showed up in Palestine one time and I was like, whoa, this is crazy. I think I'm gonna stay and kind of keep seeing what this is about and allowing people's lives to mold and shape me and give me an understanding and a paradigm for what is peace and justice work in the hardest places around the globe. Which fortifies what I was saying earlier in that it's not easy work. It's not fluffy-duffy anything. Like it's gritty and it's really painful sometimes. But then the beauty of seeing lives transformed and how people can come out the other side and say, actually, yeah, like I'm committed to this relationship with you. I want to figure this out. I want to keep working through it. I think that makes Jesus weep in a happy way. I think of like, wow, this is beautiful to see people working through that. So that's what we do at KipCorps. That's how I ended up out here. I was in Chicago previous to this and ended up getting a call suggesting that I might apply. And I did, and when I came out here, I thought, yeah, like this feels like a really good fit. And people like need help and accompaniment walking through hard things. And that's where I feel like I feel really blessed that I've had the upbringing I've had and the experiences I've had to be able to show up alongside people, because this stuff is hard. And so I don't discredit anybody for not wanting to deal with conflict. I don't either. But it feels important because my basis is Jesus. And so if Jesus is the one who's saying, I've given you the way, I've spoken it to you, I've showed you, I want to be like that too. And I don't get it right, actually, quite a lot of the time. But my hope and desire is to see, especially, and this is probably more of a personal thing than it is for work, of fellow followers of Jesus to do that well, or to grow at getting better at doing that. And so that's my challenge to us on this Peace Sunday, is to be thinking through what are the ways that we engage with one another, both as members of the body, but also people outside. How are we choosing even nonviolent communication? How are we going a step beyond than just abstaining from some kind of behavior that is maybe seen as bad, but going a step beyond where you actually are embodying the way and the being of Jesus so that people can experience that potential for transformation, to experience that calm of peace, to be around someone who in the chaos kind of remains anchored and can see other people and bring them in and pull them in. So that's where I will end is, do we live like we know what will bring us peace. Would Jesus look at us today, and what would his response be? Like, these people, they're working earnestly at living the ways that bring peace. It's not hidden from their eyes. And granted, I don't know if we're ever fully illuminated, so we're going to miss it. But I think there's something to integrity and earnestness of pursuing that way of being in the world. Yeah. So I'll go ahead and leave us with that. In the Sunday school session, I think a lot of what I'll be covering is just question and answer. So if there's something, that didn't sit right, that you're like, ooh, I need to talk about that, that's perfectly fine. You can put me to the test and see how I embody or don't embody these attributes. Or just general questions, if that's about Palestine, Israel stuff, or anything else. I would be happy to field those questions and to just chat. So let us consider what it means to live the way of Jesus in our context as we go forward today. Thank you.